So from the tester's perspective, first of all we're going to have a look at a very simple non-functional area of SAP in order to demonstrate how to create a simple test process. In this case, SAP ships with a transaction called the style guides. The style guides essentially presents a series of forms that enable us to fill those forms in without actually performing any functionality on SAP underneath. So we're going to have a look at those as part of our demonstration. This is the style guides set of forms, and in here you can see different fields that we can enter, various drop-down lists that we can select, and in this case we have a nice simple form here for entering a person's name, address, and some communication details. So we'll use that as the basis of our demonstration for today to show how a tester would create a very simple process to navigate to the style guides, select the group boxes function, and then fill in the details here. So first off, let's have a look at the AX spreadsheet layouts. Here you can see a simple spreadsheet layout showing one of 3 different spreadsheets that AX uses from the tester's perspective. The first one, in this case, we call a subtest. Now a subtest consists of typically a form, page, window, etc. within the application, and across the top here you can see a header that contains the different fields that make up the items within that form or page. So if we look across the top here, we can see the first name, last name field, street, house number, postcode, city, etc., reflecting the fields that exist within the SAP form here for the group boxes style guide. Each row within the spreadsheet represents a pathway through those objects, performing actions with varying data associated with those actions. So if we highlight the Enter Fred row here, we can see here that we're setting the first name to Fred, last name to Tester, street to Imperial Way, etc. as we read left to right across that row. You can see also on the second row here that we're setting the fields to a different set of values, and we're actually ignoring the postcode field. This pound symbol or hash symbol here represents a skip action. Now AX employs a very simple set of actions which are easy to pick up, easy to remember, and enable us to do most of the testing activity that we want against a particular application under test. We use the action set for input of data. We use the action get to get information from the system under test, i.e. the value of a field or the label of a field, etc. We also use the action val to perform validation against the contents of a field, the actual meat of testing. So val actions here are used to confirm what we see within a field is what we expected. We also have some actions for working with different data sources. So we have a load action to enable us to load data from external sources. These can be from external files, from databases, those kind of areas. And then we have a save action to store data that gets generated during the course of our test. So with those very simple actions, we can perform most of the things that we want to do as a tester. So for our demonstration today, we're going to create a new pathway through that field, entering some specific information for a demonstration user. So in this case, we're going to put in an ID. This ID refers to that pathway or route through the application as we build up a larger process, and we'll see how that fits in later on. Put in a description, and then we essentially add the different actions and the data that we want to present in this case. And we can continue to type this in, but the important thing here is just to create the various actions that we need for our test case. We can essentially cut and paste the rest of the actions from a previous test, as the data values that we want to use remain the same. So we'll scroll across here, copy the values, and paste them into the remainder of our test. Let's, for example, change the email address of our user here to be john@demo.com. So we've defined here a completely new route through that form using various actions and data that we want. This row we've referred to as enter demo, and you'll see how that fits in when we come to sequence our test together into a larger process. Obviously a test will consist of more than one form within an application. Here we've only highlighted one particular form, but you can also see across the bottom of our spreadsheet layout here that we have a number of different forms. So let's take a look at those. So for example, for the checkboxes form here, we have a checkboxes subtest which shows street, house number, postal code, various different validation steps in here as well, and all the different fields as we scroll left to right across the page. And you can see that we have one for each of the different forms that we use. In this case, all the different style guides that we have available to us. So, let's introduce the second of our 3 spreadsheet layouts that demonstrate how to build a test. This is the Test Spreadsheet within the AX Test Automation platform. A test spreadsheet enables us to sequence together subtests to form a larger process, essentially stringing together forms, navigation actions, that sort of thing, to form larger end-to-end processes that we can run against our SAP system. So in this case, each row represents a test scenario. Our test scenario consists of an ID to identify that scenario, a brief description, a base state. A base state in this case is a start point for that test, and in this case we're talking about the SAP Easy Access screen. So let's take ourselves back to the Easy Access screen, and we can see that this is the start point for our test. The following pairs of information then relate to calls to the various subtests, and you can see in here that we're referring to a subtest called Transactions with a row called Go to Bibs. Let's navigate to that particular subtest. You can see within this subtest the Go to Bibs row is setting on the main window, entering nbibs, the transaction code, into the command field, and then hitting enter. So let's go back to our test, and we can see the second of those 2 tests goes to the Style Guide Index subtest and selects group boxes. So let's follow that process through. Here is our Style Guide Index, and there is the Group Boxes tab. We can see the Style Guide Index has a row called Select Group Boxes. Essentially this ignores all of the other links apart from clicking or setting on the Group Boxes link within that particular form. The final stage of our test is to enter a value with no postcode. So let's navigate to that subtest, and we'll have a look at the no postcode row, and there you can see the row with Adam Brown's information going in this case ignoring the postcode field. So within our test spreadsheet we have 3 subtests, 2 of which navigate us to the style guide, and then the row for entering a postcode. So let's create our new test case. We'll call this SAP Demo 1. Demo user has the same base state, and in fact the first 2 processes are identical. Go to the Bibs transaction and select group boxes. Just that when we get to our style guide demo form, in this case we're going to use the row that we created here called enter demo, which sets John's details in. So we'll copy and paste the ID, and we'll use that at that point. Now that we've created our simple scenario, we can go in and use the code generation capability of the AX product to generate our GUI script for automation purposes and our manual script to view the documentation of our test process. So let's go off and do that. Here is the AX code generation user interface. This enables us to select tests that we want to build code or documentation for from our drop downs. And you can see here the new SAP demo test that we created in our spreadsheets. So let's select that test case. At this stage we can now hit the build button. What AX will do for us, it will read in the process as defined by the spreadsheet. And what AX has done at this stage is it's generated us the automated test in VBScript for SAP GUI scripting. It's also generated us the documentation in readable, natural language, demonstrating what that test actually does. So let's have a look at those 2 assets. Firstly, the documentation asset. In this case, we can see in here the different instructions that make up that particular test case, entering values into the various fields, and there you can see John's name going into the first name field and demo into the last name field, and the email address that we changed. Essentially this forms the basis of manual test documentation. It forms the repro steps for a developer. It also forms potentially a documentation for audit purposes or sign-off by the business to demonstrate that this is a valid test case. We also have the capability at this stage to generate this in a Word document. So using our Export to Word feature, we can go off and have a look at our SAP demo created in OpenOffice. Reading this in WordPad here, we can see, ensure the main menu is displayed, and all the different steps that make up that particular test. The other asset that we've created at this stage is our VB script. So let's go off and have a look at that particular VB script. And there it is, generated in the debug folder. We'll open this in a code editor, and you can see here the VB script file that enables us to perform our automated test against the SAP GUI system. And if we scroll down, we can see in here the actions that will set the text values of the fields to John, Demo, Imperial Way, and eventually at the bottom here, our email field. We can also see that we add our own API calls to manage execution logs, as well as error handling capabilities, etc. So what acts as generated is a robust, reusable test script that can be run against that system in a repeated manner. With these scripts, we don't maintain them. They essentially become a ticker tape that SAP GUI scripting follows in order to perform those testing processes and log any execution results. So if we need to make amendments to the script processes, we go back to the spreadsheets and we amend them there, or anything to do with the actual code structures, we will amend any code templates that led to these. So all aspects are essentially customizable. So we'll close out of our script. Now at this point we can execute the script. So let's take Axe back to its SAP Easy Access screen, and we can hit Run from the toolbar here. Now if we watch closely, Axe has generated the code, launched the scripting capability, and navigated to the appropriate form, filling in the detail that we created in our demo. At this point we can go off and have a look at the results. So the results here show in the same language as the spreadsheets the results of execution against that system. We can see here that the whole process took 1.8 seconds to perform. We drill down, we can see the different subtests, the navigation to the transaction, the selection from the star guide index, and finally the entry of all the details, broken down to the very lowest level here of the speed it took to enter that information, some of which didn't even register because it was so rapid. In this case we can use these timings for indicative performance of our system, and these can be measured over time. So that's our view of the results. This can be viewed in a browser without any specific licenses, posted onto a server, etc., and often forms a useful representation of test progress over time. We can also link this back to test documentation to see what the actual steps were that were being performed at this point. Let's now, as a final thing, look at a larger test packs running against SAP, just to demonstrate the speed and capability of the test automation platform running natively against the SAP GUI scripting capability. So in this case we're going to pick a larger test pack. We're going to build our test system. We can see here that we've got 28 different tests successfully built, and we'll launch those tests against the system under test. In this case, Axe takes care of logging into the system and then performing the different tests, first off against the star guide areas that we looked at before, and you can see a number of different test processes being performed against dialog boxes, group boxes, etc. So now Axe has completed its execution. The test scripts have run against that system, and we can go and view the results. In this case, you can see the larger results view, including, as we expected in fact, some fails against that system. And you can see here a validation failure showing a date format that's come out incorrectly. We can also see here an image that we've saved against that particular grid, and we can see all the details associated with it. Axe will automatically capture images when tests fail. So that concludes the demonstration of the Axe Test Automation platform, showing the tester's perspective, building spreadsheets to define test scenarios, using the Axe code generation capability to generate VB script and manual test documentation, and executing those tests against an SAP system. Thank you for your time.